All right. Last time we were talking about OSHA and looking at the basic standards, and again, a lot to cover in that. Same thing, same kind of concept tonight. We're going to talk about ERISA. All right, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act. It's the employee. It is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, an act that went in place 1974. That's probably the only time you're going to hear me give you the name of the act, because the rest of the time I'm just going to refer to it as what everybody else does, ERISA. Okay, simply ERISA. Again, there are attorneys that do nothing but ERISA. This thing is a complete, covers a ton of stuff, very, very specialized, but I want to give you some of the basics of it, if you will, because I think it's important if you're going to be working as an administrator or as a manager in any capacity, you need to know a little bit about ERISA. So when we talk about ERISA, let me ask you this. What do you know about it before we get in there? What do you know about it? Anybody ever heard of it before? Oh, okay. All right. Well, you will. Because if you work for anybody that has a 401k plan, ERISA applies. It probably applies. If you have anybody that has health insurance, any of you employed that have health insurance, okay, not yet, will apply, all right? Basically, ERISA applies to two types of overall plans. I'm talking, and then we'll break these plans down into more specific subparts. But basically, ERISA applies to two types of plans. There are what we call welfare plans. And I don't necessarily like that word because it throws people in a different direction, but here's really what we're talking about. Your healthcare plans, okay? Your daycare plans. If you've got cafeteria plans where you can, and what do I mean by a cafeteria plan? Somebody tell me what that means. Patrick, let me call him.
Is that food stamps or?
No, yeah.
It's not like Aflac and stuff like that, and it's pre-tax deductions where you can get, different kinds of health insurance.
You get health insurance, vision insurance, dental insurance. You kind of pick and choose. It's kind of like a cafeteria, if you will. Okay? Yeah, it's like going through a buffet at a cafeteria or a cafeteria line, and you can pick this, you can pick that, whatever. Okay? So that's what we talk about when we talk about welfare plans. That's one type of plan covered by ERISA. For most of you, where it will really impact you is the healthcare. Most companies that deal with these welfare plans, they have what we call healthcare plans, okay, the medical plan. Those are generally governed by ERISA. Not all, but most. All right. The second is what we call the pension plans. And generally, these are retirement plans. We're going to break those. We'll break each of these down and talk about them in just a minute. ERISA generally does not apply to public sector employers generally does not apply to public sector employers or to plans of tax-exempt churches. Okay? Now, if ERISA applies, it preempts state law. Kind of give you an example on this. If ERISA applies, it preempts state law. Missouri has a law, certainly a public policy if not a statute, that says I can't assign personal injury rights. Okay? Now, so if I'm driving down the highway and somebody crosses the median and hits me, all right, I may have a health care plan that covers me. I may have my own insurance that covers me. And then I sue the guy that crossed the line and hit me. All right? Now, if we're only talking Missouri, and we're not talking ERISA at all, I not only get my insurance payments that came in from my medical on health insurance, whatever, okay, but I also get all of the things I got from the guy who sued me. All right, you with me? If my health care plan, however, has become an ERISA plan, it is governed by federal law. And now, if my health care plan pays for my hospitalization while I'm injured, and I go back to sue the guy who crossed the line, then the insurance company, my health care plan, gets what? They get reimbursed. Yeah, they get reimbursed. They get reimbursed for the extent that they're out. And where you really see it is, and so if I've gone to an attorney and given an attorney a third of whatever I recover, guess how much the healthcare plan gets on their reimbursement generally? I mean, not that you would know this, okay? Generally, the healthcare can get dollar for dollar on what they paid out. And you go, well, wait a second, the healthcare plan didn't do anything to get the reimbursement. Court says, hey, ERISA is a federal plan. If the contract says you don't get anything, or if the contract says they get reimbursed dollar for dollar, then they get reimbursed. So ERISA on a federal level, you wouldn't have that same reimbursement on the state level, but because if it's an ERISA plan, then the ERISA plan, the health plan, is entitled to reimbursement. I will tell you this, almost every, not every, but almost every healthcare plan for corporations probably falls under an ERISA plan these days. Not all, okay, but many. Most of them. I say most, I can say most. Okay? So ERISA will preempt state law. The other thing is ERISA is very serious about fiduciary requirements. So all plans have to have, they have to be in writing, by the way. These ERISA plans have to be in writing. And they have to designate at least one fiduciary having the authority to manage and control the plan. Now, when we say fiduciary, what do we mean by that term? What's a fiduciary? What's that mean? Jackie, you want to give it a stab?
Sure. It's someone who sort of acts as a representative.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. All right. If you've got a trustee or if you've got a trust, all right, and you have a person whose assets are in that trust, and let's say, well, I have a trust, all right, and if I were suddenly to become incompetent, somebody else would be my trustee, all right, and that person has a duty to make sure that they follow what my trust says. And if my trust says my kids get everything and they run off with it and give it to somebody else or use it for their own or pocket it, they breach their fiduciary duty. All right? And I tell you this, and you go, wow, I don't ever have to worry about this. If you are ever in management, you may have to worry about this because right now the big thing is ERISA is looking at particularly fiduciaries with regard to 401ks and investment, all right? And they spend, we had a meeting last week, probably took 2 hours by the time we finished everything, where we looked at our plan, we had the people come in, and they look at how much we're spending on the plan, how much it's costing our employees, what kind of investment options they have. The whole idea is to make sure our employees are protected, okay? And so you have to have fiduciaries with regard to those plans. So ERISA plans have to have fiduciaries. These fiduciaries have to do what we call the prudent person rule. What would the prudent person do? Okay? And it's the idea that you have to provide benefits for the whole, not just for the fiduciary. Okay? All right. Now, What kind of plans do you have under ERISA? Two types. Patrick?
Welfare and pension.
All right, you have welfare and you have pension. And an example of welfare, Patrick, I'll stay with you.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, all right. Now, what would be an example of a pension plan?
Retirement.
All right, retirement. Two types of retirement plans we want to talk about. Okay. We have what is called a defined benefit plan. And we have what is defined as a, or we'll say is a defined contribution plan. So let me give you those again and then we'll come back. You have what's called a defined benefit plan. And you have what is called a defined contribution plan. All right? Basically, anybody know the difference, by the way? Jackie, go ahead.
Defined benefit is where, for example, your employee would know how much they're going to get total at their retirement, and defined contribution is you know how much your employer will be like contributing monthly or like at a certain period of time.
Yeah. A defined benefit plan is one that promises the employee or the participant a specific monthly benefit at retirement. Okay? This is your benefit. It's the benefit itself is defined, all right? So that when you retire, you're going to get X number of dollars. Now, what has been the problem? If you watch the news at all, what's been the problem with defined benefit plans lately?
Cost of living's increased.
Cost of living's increased. Jackie?
And the economy, I mean, a lot of it's investment based.
A lot of it's investment based, as Jackie says, so it's gone down. I mean, right here in Springfield, if you look at the pension plan for police officers, firefighters, all right, they were guaranteed a certain benefit upon retirement. The problem is there's not been enough people putting into it to add to it, so the benefits have slowly gone down. All right, and that's what we call a defined benefit plan, that when you retire, you're going to get a certain amount. All right, now that amount can it doesn't necessarily have to be a dollar amount. In other words, it can be adjusted if you retire at 62 versus if you retire at 55 versus if you retire at 58. All right, may depend upon the years of service, but it is all defined that if you do A, B, and C, you are going to get this benefit. It's what we call a defined benefit plan. You're seeing more and more companies go away from that and going to what we call a defined contribution plan. Okay? And basically, a defined contribution plan provides an individual account for each participant, but that amount is then based upon what the participant puts in. It's based upon how the income of the investments do. It's based upon the expenses of the plan. It's based upon gains and losses. And it's based upon what the employer will match or not match. All right. The bottom line is there are no promises of a set specific amount upon retirement. Typical example of this would be a 401k plan. If you have a 401k plan or know somebody who has a 401k plan, that is a defined contribution plan. Now, won't get into all because they're tricks with regard to vesting, but when we say vesting, let's talk just a little bit. I don't want to get into specifics on it, but when we say vesting, what are we talking about? What's vesting mean? Tom, want to give it
A vested interest is basically like you've already put in so much, so you might as well continue to pay into it.
Okay. Vested interest just means I put into it, this is when I get it back, all right? Where it comes into play is if you have an employer match situation. Where it really comes into play is when you have an employer match, all right? Let's say you have a 401k plan, and in that 401k plan, you have put in $100. But in the first 6 months of that plan, your employer said, we'll match. And they've put in $50, all right? They're generous and they put in $50. So you have a total of $150 sitting in that plan after 6 months, all right? Now, how much of that how much of that are you entitled to when you leave? And there's no real way to answer that, but because you don't know all the factors. But how much are you certainly entitled to?
$100.
Certainly entitled to 100 because that's yours, all right? The other 50 will depend upon what the plan says. So if the plan says, hey, you are not fully vested until you've been here a year, and you've only been there 6 months, how much of that 50 do you get? Huh, Melissa?
None.
Yeah, you get none of it, all right? Then some plans get into this idea, well, you're vested on a staggering basis. So you may be vested 50% after 6 months, 100% after 1 year. If you're invested 50% after 6 months, how much do you get of that 50?
I'm sorry, 25.
Yeah, you get 25, all right? Now, there are certain requirements on vesting, and there's certain staggering, and you can have 1 year vesting. You can also have graduated vesting, which goes from maybe 3 years to 7 years. And I'm not concerned that you know all about that. What I am concerned is you understand this whole idea of vesting. Tom?
Wouldn't it also depend on what kind of plan it is, like a 401k versus a Roth IRA?
No, it may depend upon the plan. No, that's a great question. It may depend upon the plan. Yeah. So there are certain rules with regard to different plans. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the Roth IRA, while we're talking about it, because some 401k plans actually have a Roth component part of them. What is a Roth IRA?
A Roth IRA basically takes the taxes out before the money goes in, as opposed to a 401k, which puts the money in, and then when you take money out, it takes taxes out of that.
Right. So if I'm putting in $100 right now, and I put it in tomorrow, and it's a Roth IRA, I may only have showing $77.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, but when I take let's say that $77 grows to $100 2 weeks, and then I take it out, well, I get all $100, and guess how much gets taxed on that 100? Zero. All right? As opposed to most 401ks without the Roth IRA component is, if I put in $100, tomorrow my schedule is going to show what?
$100.
It's going to show $100. Yeah. But now when I take that $100 out, assuming I don't have penalties or whatever, and I'm just paying taxes, I'm going to pay, let's say it's grown to $150, I'm now going to pay taxes on that $150 that I've withdrawn, as opposed to just the 100. So a lot of it depends. A lot of it's a guessing game. You got to talk to accountants and brokers and financial advisors as to what to do. But no, that's a good point. You can have a Roth IRA. So this vesting changes upon whether it's a Roth, whether it's a defined benefit plan, whether it's a defined contribution plan. You're going to have different rules for both. Basically, there are reporting and disclosing requirements. Okay. And I'm not sure that I want to get into all of the nuts and bolts of that, except that, again, overseen by the Secretary of Labor, okay, there's filed what we call a summary description plan. These plans frequently, sorry, Drew, these plans can be longer than this stack of paper, all right? But they'll give you but the plan has to have a summary description plan that may be 3 or 4 pages long, all right? And each plan must have a summary description plan that shows exactly, or summarizes, if you will, the description of the plan. Here's what your requirements are, here's what you can do. Can you borrow? Not all can you borrow from the plan, all right? Do you have to have a hardship? Do you have to, all kinds of rules and regulations. Also all kinds of rules with regard to testing. What do I mean by testing? Anybody know? One of the problems that, when I say problems, one of the concerns for the Department of Labor in setting up the ERISA is that certain people in a company would want to take advantage of the plan and not really worry about the others, all right? So, for instance, when I was at my former firm, we as partners may have wanted to contribute as much as we possibly could to the plan, all right? However, our plan was set up so that if we contributed too much, and it was all a percentage, and we won't get into all the details, But if we contributed too much and came up to this level here, we had to bring the rest of our employees up to this level here. All right, does that make sense? So that it was all percentages, and that's what they call testing. I'm not going to get too involved in testing because most of you won't get involved in that aspect of it, but you need to be aware of it. In addition, you also generally have to file an annual premium form with a pension benefit guarantee corporation. And the pension benefit guarantee corporation is basically out there so that if the pension or if the plan goes belly up, there's a guarantee corporation that can step in and help people who have lost some money. Okay? Or if there's going to be a termination. Now, any questions about it to this extent or to anything we talked about so far? All right. There's all kinds of administrative requirements on it. There are tax penalties that can come into play. There are penalties if you're not being a good fiduciary. Okay. Under ERISA, individuals may bring lawsuits directly. May bring lawsuits directly. Okay. Give you a couple of examples. When I was in private practice, represented a guy, worked at Circuit City, Best Buy, one of those places. I don't remember which. But they allowed people to be on their health care plan, and their health care plan was a ERISA plan. And they allowed people to be on their health care plan who were full-time employees. All right? Now, here was their definition of a full-time employee. Somebody who worked at least 32 hours a week, average, at least 32 hours a week, and was identified as a full-time employee. Okay, you get that? Their definition of a full-time employee was somebody who worked 32 hours a week and was labeled or identified as a full-time employee. My particular client at that time had some kind of internal problem that he'd had for a while. And he kept trying to go to them or went to them, said, I want to get on the plan, want to get on the plan. He goes, no, you don't qualify, don't qualify, don't qualify. And ended up having some surgery that was pretty extensive. And we went and we said, look, you've got to put him on this plan and you're violating ERISA because of the way you're doing your definition. You're really discriminating again. Because what was up to them?
If they were labeled full-time or not?
Yeah, they decided if he was labeled full-time or not. And he was an employee who had worked more than 40 hours for 2 or 3 years. All right? And eventually we settled it. We didn't have to go to court on the issue, but eventually we settled it on certain things. But that was the idea. So they have certain examples of people can bring lawsuits. We've got one right now. I won't get into all of the details, but interesting case out of one of our hotels in, let's just go out East Coast, and we won't go any further than that. Have a husband and wife, all right? Husband has worked at our facility, one of our hotels, forever, all right, for a long time. Husband undergoes a sex change, all right? Now, not only does he undergo the sex change, but he gets his birth certificate changed, and he tells us that he's undergone the sex change, and he brings us the birth certificate. And we put hers into the file and continue to employ him, her, now her, okay, as an employee, and no problem. Husband and wife, now I guess, for lack of a better term, wife and wife still employed. Wife, who was formerly under our plan, has a medical condition of some kind, I don't know, automobile accident, whatever, now needs medical services. Turns it in to us to provide the medical services, and we say, sorry, we can't do that. Because the plan, and by the way, this is true, I think this will change eventually, but right now it's true for most plans. There's a federal act out there that says ERISA plans have to define who can be a dependent, and a dependent is defined as a spouse of the opposite sex, right? So we get in and we look at it, and they ask us to provide benefits, and we go, sorry, we can't provide benefits because why?
Because the spouse isn't of the opposite sex.
Not of the opposite sex. And their response, and they come back, and we have the organization that comes back and threatens to sue us and says, hey, these marriages are valid, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, we don't care about the marriage. Whether you think the marriage is valid, I'm not here to argue, regardless of where we stand on that. I'm not going to argue. The bottom line is, assume the marriage is valid. Your spouse is not a member of the opposite sex. And the ERISA plan requires her to be a member of the opposite sex. And we can't use benefits that may affect the rest of the plan members by affecting you. We'll see. Maybe we get sued, maybe we don't. They've threatened it. We'll see. But I'm confident in our position on that, because there's a federal law that requires us to be members of the opposite sex. And we said, hey, you want to go back? You can do that. You want your spouse to get a sex change? We'll reevaluate that. But the bottom line is, right now, we don't have spouses of the opposite sex. And so these things can get, the administration and the enforcement of these can get pretty interesting cases. The ERISA law itself, let's face it, it's pretty boring when you just get right down to it. But it is a big law that if you're working in any kind of administration, you'll want to go to classes on it. If you're working on management, you'll want to discuss and look at and get some seminars under your belt for ERISA. As far as our purposes in here, gosh, that's all I really care about for right now. Okay? With that in mind, any questions about it?
Yeah.
Yes, Dave.
Does the law cover anything about, like in a pension plan, is there generally a beneficiary if the person that holds that plan dies?
Yeah, give me a little bit more. You mean who gets the?
Say that somebody with the pension plan has all the requirements to retire with the pension, and they die of a heart attack or something. Is their spouse able to draw the pension?
Yes.
Or is it just disappear?
That's a great question. It is written within the plans themselves. Okay, so and you can pick and choose. Represented a guy, for instance, who was and your pensions. Let me make this a little bit clear. ERISA doesn't generally affect public sector. There are separate laws for that, so you don't want to cross apples and oranges. But both of them have those same kind of definitions, and many of your plans are defined so that you can do it a couple of ways. In other words, if you've got a pension, you may sign up for a part of that plan, or that plan may allow you to sign up that says, hey, if I die, or I'm going to take 25% less right now so that when I die, my spouse can continue on. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Not really? Did that? Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it depends upon how the plan's worded. I can have a provision in a plan. I can say, no, I want to, and again, it's how it's worded. Not all plans give you this option. But I can say, I tell you what, I want 100% when I retire. And they'll go, fine. And that plan may say, we'll give you this amount right now. It may even be 110% or whatever. But we'll give you X amount right now. But when you die, that's the end of it. The plan may also have a provision that says, you can take less than what we would give you if you retired right now, so that when you die, your beneficiary spouse can have it. Okay? So that depends upon a couple of things. Depends upon how the particular plan is worded and what the options are, and it depends upon what was accepted by the participant. Okay? The other issue that sometimes comes into play and creates not so good feelings amongst spouses and ex-spouses is this idea of who the beneficiary is. Because sometimes what we see happen is husband and wife, married, long time, whatever. Beneficiary is going to be the wife. Husband and wife divorce. But guess what husband doesn't do? Doesn't take her off the beneficiary. Doesn't change her. So now, beneficiary says, so-and-so, who used to be his wife, now who gets it? All right? So creates an interesting, fun-loving situation in court. All right? Does that help at all?
Yeah, for the most part it does. So it's something that's actually within the plan itself. It's not something that ERISA actually.
Yeah, it is. There is not one law that says this. It has to be within the plan, written within the plan, and it has to be an option that's taken within the plan. But it's a great question. It's a great question because we see it a lot. Yeah, we see a lot of times where either they elect that. It's really called, for the most part, it's what we would call frequently a survivor's annuity in the pension plan. Sometimes they're worded that way. But yeah, that's it has to be an option within the plan, and it has to be accepted within the plan. Okay? But it's a good question. Melissa?
Is it possible for those plans to run out of money? Like, say you paid it in for 40 years, and then you don't have the money?
Yeah, but well, a couple of things happen. First of all, the economy tanks. All right? Second, you get somebody, and this has happened, particularly with smaller plans, you get somebody that runs off with the money. You know, you get an administrator that siphons the money, doesn't turn it in, or whatever. And that's really what that guarantee corporation is for, that pension benefit guarantee corporation.
So you can get your money from that guarantee?
It's almost like an insurance. It's almost like, for lack of a better analogy, the FDIC. If you go and your bank loses its money, it may be insured, the money in their deposits may be insured up to a certain amount. So you can get some of that recovery back.
And then with the health insurance, the agency over that, do you have to have so many employees for that to be in effect over you, or like, I've never really heard of there being too much into that. I just was wondering if you had to have like a certain amount of employees.
You can, with regard to your health benefit plans, you can set those rules. Okay, you can set those rules, and you can decide. You just can't discriminate, and you certainly can't discriminate with race, sex, age, those things. But you can certainly have plans that you can have an ERISA plan with less than with a smaller amount of people if you want to. Now, frequently it may not be beneficial to do it because you've got. Remember, with ERISA, you're going to have a lot of administrative requirements. You've got fiduciary duties. It may be better just to go out and get individual plans that are not under this ERISA umbrella. Okay. And one of the things that we're seeing raises a point, and I won't spend a lot of time, and we may talk about it in terms of sexual discrimination, but regarding contraceptives, okay, and what is allowed for males, what will health plans cover for males versus what they'll cover for females. Okay, and so you can get into that, and we may talk about some of that when we get into sexual discrimination in a few weeks. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. See you next time.